Hello everyone, so this is the last video we're going to do on The Disaster Artist, chapters 16 and 17. And I know what you're thinking, no, I am not in Hawaii, I'm still stuck in my apartment, but I'm trying to bring a bit of life. So, chapter 16 is called Don't Be Shocked. Now, in this chapter, they are back in San Francisco with a small crew filming the last scenes of The Room. Also in this chapter, there's another section of backstory to Tommy Wiseau, who at this point is still Pierre. So now Pierre arrives in San Francisco. As soon as he arrives there, he changes his name to Thomas. And what we find out is he starts to sell yo-yos to tourists. So he sells yo-yos on the Fisherman Wharf, which is a very touristic spot in San Francisco. So he starts selling yo-yos, and he starts selling these little toy birds that you kind of throw almost like a boomerang, and it comes back to you. So that is actually where he gets his nickname, because people start calling him the Birdman. They say, oh, he's the Birdman, he sells the birds. And so he takes the French word for bird, oiseau, and replaces the O for a W. So that's how he becomes Thomas Wiseau. We also find out that he was engaged at some point to a woman, this most beautiful woman ever, according to Tommy. And on page 263 it says, he is immensely happy for the first time in his life, until, that is, the woman betrays him multiple times, according to Thomas, which drives him into some unspecified breakdown and results in a panic-filled move back to San Francisco proper. He admits that someone betrayed him, and we can see that that's a recurring theme in Tommy's life, and also one in the Room movie, right? That people betray him, he is betrayed. Some of this betrayal comes from his failed marriage. So eventually, Tommy works so hard that he goes from selling yo-yos to selling clothes in this gigantic warehouse, right, Street Fashions USA, which he apparently bought himself. Again, there's a lot of, it's how do you go from selling, $3, $4 yo-yos on the street to owning a building that you can then sell for $2.9 million? Again, we're not too sure how we get to this point, but that is a fact. He did sell a building for $2.9 million. So again, adds to the mystery. How did he get to that? Can you really get to that point just by selling stuff off the street? So now back to the actual story. Tommy wants to film some more scenes with dialogue, and they don't know where to film, and they're like, oh, you're crazy. So he pulls up to this building, this very big building, Street Fashions USA, which at this point, Mark and nobody in the crew know that that is Tommy's building, that he owns it. So at one point, there's a man, an architect, who comes up to Tommy and says, oh, I think I would like to continue to pay my lease for the office, $8,000 a month. So this architect is paying Tommy $8,000 a month to be able to have a spot of this building. Again, you wouldn't expect Tommy off the street, to be leasing apartments and condos and offices to these wealthy people. So Mark makes the reflection on page 266. I thought, wait, does Tommy manage this building? Does he own it? I had known him for 4 years and he had never mentioned owning a building. This was premium San Francisco real estate. Again, shows how Tommy is secretive, right? To not mention something like this, which is huge, right? Prime real estate means that, it's a place where a lot of people would like to have that building because it's very, a lot of people go by it. Now notice on top of this building, there's 2 huge American flags, which Tommy mentions, says, for your information, those are the largest American flags in San Francisco. So he did his research. He wanted to be sure to have the biggest American flags in San Francisco, right? Go USA! Now, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this to you guys before, but on top of this building, there's actually a rooftop area which has a magnificent view of San Francisco. And Mark makes thinks to himself, why didn't we use this place, this set, to shoot the rooftop scenes that Tommy wanted? Because it's an actual rooftop. It wouldn't look fake. You wouldn't have that green screen effect because it is actually a nice San Francisco rooftop. Of course, Tommy either didn't think about it or didn't want to because he didn't want people to know about his building. So we're going to skip ahead to page 270. And on this page, Mark mentions they're playing in the Golden Gate Park. They're throwing a ball. and Tommy keeps dropping it because he's so clumsy. He keeps dropping the ball, and of course he blames Greg. He says, "Oh, Greg, you're trying to throw these tricky shots." So eventually Mark gets annoyed with him and he says in French, "Attrape ça." This makes Tommy go crazy because he doesn't like foreign languages in his films. So he starts saying, "No French, no French." And he actually runs up to him, jumps on him to try to, tackle him and throw him to the ground. If you remember correctly, this scene is actually in the movie. We see Tommy run up to Greg, kind of jump on him and try to wrestle him to the ground. As Mark says, on page 270, he says, "Tommy kept his rather awkward tackle of me in the film. It looks playful, like they're having fun, but it was anything but in reality." So it actually looks like they're playing around, but in reality they were upset at each other and they wanted to, fight. Now comes the filming of the famous flower shop scene, right? The hi doggy scene. What we find out is that he actually just asked the women, he says, "Can I use your shop for the whole afternoon? Plus a dozen red roses for $20, right? Which is nothing. I mean, that means they lose a whole afternoon of business. And I mean, just a dozen red roses must be at least $15. Again, shows how Tommy is very cheap on certain things. So they actually film this scene over and over again. The woman who's there at the counter is actually the real owner of the shop. And after 2-3 takes, Tommy actually notices that there's a dog on the counter. This dog is so old and fragile that it hadn't moved. People thought it was like, just part of the counter. So he actually improvises. He goes, "Oh, hi, doggy." And that moment is kept in the final movie, as we see. On page 273, Greg says, "In fact, this might be Tommy's most candid moment in the entire film, and the clearest evidence of the lovable and endearing side of his personality. Hi, doggy, it was warped, accidental genius." So it shows, out of all this frustration and all the moments of he can't remember his lines, he can't do something simple, this is the only moment in the movie where Tommy looks like he's having fun, right? The rest of the movie, he's always like, "Oh, I didn't get my promotion, my wife is cheating on me." But this moment where he sees the dog, it makes him happy. "Hi, doggy." Then, funnily enough, he asks the owner, after he's touched the dog and everything, he says, "Is it the real thing?" Which the woman goes, "What?" He says, "Is it a real thing?" And she goes, "Yes, it is a real thing." Last thing to note in this chapter is that he goes back home, while he's in San Francisco, he visits his family, and Tommy has given him a rough edit of the movie. So it's not the exact version that we saw, but it's basically the same thing, but with the audio that's not necessarily synced, but basically the same thing. So he watches that with his family, and they laugh so hard that their cheeks hurt, right? Because, it's so ridiculous. And in a way, as Greg mentions on 276, he says, "Although I didn't know it, my family in California had become the room's collective patient zero. Their response to the room was a powerful indicator of what this film would do on a much larger scale." So the reaction of the family, who are laughing at a movie that should be tragic, shows what will happen to this movie eventually, right? Because now it's almost more seen as a comedy than a drama. Final chapter now. This is my life. Very short chapter, and we won't spend too much time on this. Basically, it's just the premiere of the movie. Before the premiere, however, there is this section where Greg talks about how editing this movie was a nightmare because, the editor would tell Tommy, "Well, we have to take this out. It makes no sense." And Tommy would say, "No, it stays." "Okay, well, we have to cut this 12-minute sex scene because it's way too long." "No, it stays." So this, as Greg calls it, this everything stays mentality was a big part of the editing process, which was a disaster for the poor editor. Tommy wants everything to stay so bad that he even put both of the logos that his production company made in the movie because he wasn't able to decide which one he wanted. So it goes like Tommy Wiseau Films, Wiseau Productions, right? Because he wasn't able to choose. So Tommy and Greg arrived to the premiere of the movie in a limo, right? That of course Tommy rented a limo. And as he pulls up to the cinema, he notices that there's not enough people. So he asks the driver, "No, go around again," right? Now, this is ridiculous because, you have the other actors who are in the movie who are waiting for them to come out. So they're like, okay, we have to wait till they go around again. So he does this twice. No, not enough people. 3 times. And then finally he decides to get out. Because then he thinks, okay, there's enough people. And again, he doesn't get out immediately. He stays in the limo and people are waiting like, what are you doing? Come on out. And he's like, no, it builds anticipation. Ay, Tommy. So the moment is finally here. Tommy is there with all the cast and crew. Well, those who wanted to come to the premiere anyways. They're there. He comes up to the stage, and for the first time ever, basically, he is stressed, right? Tommy is not someone who is usually stressed out, but now he's stressed and he's shaking and he's sweating a lot. And he says to the audience, this is my movie. This is my life. I hope you learn something and discover yourself. Be cool, he mumbled. Clearly not the most enticing speech ever, but it comes from the heart. As he's coming down from the stage, he stops by Greg and he says, I'm happy you're here. I could never do this project without you. So again, it shows how Tommy is thankful for Greg and how, this movie is kind of their joint project, right? They did this together, even though Greg, it wasn't his aspiration to make this type of a movie. If we go to page 285, from the last paragraph to the end of the book is very beautiful and is basically the whole reason that I decided to choose this book to teach it. And basically it's all about how this movie, whether it's good or bad, is Tommy's, and that nobody can take that away from him. When you create something, it is yours, and people can make fun of it. People can, tell you it's bad, but unless they have done something themselves, they are just critics, right? They're just people who are trying to put you down. Now, agreed, Tommy should have been put down a couple of times in the sense that he was cruel, he was insensitive, as Greg mentions. In getting there, Tommy had sometimes been destructive and sometimes cruel. But how could anyone not be moved by Tommy, who had fought so hard against the unforgiving confines of his star-crossed life? So all the odds were against him. Everybody was telling him, don't do this, you're weird, stay home, we don't want to watch your movie. And he still pushed really hard because he believed in it. It doesn't matter if we believe in it or not. What matters is that he believes in himself. The last paragraph is very beautiful. I'm going to read it to you guys. So it says, Tommy removed his sunglasses and glanced back at me. He had tears in his eyes. He smiled, nodded, and turned towards the screen. It wasn't often that you got to see a man whose dream was literally about to come true. But then the lights went down and I couldn't see him anymore. It's a beautiful thing for Greg to say that, because it is true. It's rare that you will get to see the act of someone, realizing their dream, that, actually doing it. And in that moment, Greg got to see that. So if that's something that we can hold positive from this book, there is that. So there you go. That is The Disaster Artist. I hope you guys enjoyed this book, or at least if you didn't, at least enjoyed the fact that it was different from something that you've probably read before. For those of you who are interested, the movie The Disaster Artist is on Netflix, and I highly suggest that you go watch it because, there's a lot of similarities between the book, of course, and there's also a surprise cameo. Tommy is in there somewhere. Let's see if you're going to be able to notice. So, in the meantime, take care of yourselves and don't forget to answer the questions in the comments. Bye-bye.